Bannerlord has finally arrived. All those months of waiting patiently have paid off, and you've got your first campaign running. But then this happened. Or this, or even this. Fear not, in this video I'm going to share with you my best advice and tips for getting started in Bannerlord so you can get past the steep learning curve and start dominating Calradia. We have a couple choices to make from the main menu that can make a big difference with how our campaign plays out. Campaign mode or Sandbox mode. Campaign mode is a bit more restrictive with how we can build our main character, with 6 background options to pick from, no options to change our age, and the starting location will always be at the training field outside of Poros. On the plus side, we get access to more family members, a brother that's of age to use very early on, and 2 more siblings that need a few years to mature, but will become very useful soon. And finally, campaign mode has a set main quest line to follow that can help give a sense of direction. For a game with as many options as Bannerlord, it can be overwhelming trying to figure out what to do, and the main quest can help with that. On the flip side, we have Sandbox mode that has 5 starting options to pick from and gives us the points for the 6th option to spend as we wish. There's an option to select how old we want our character to start, with older options giving more attribute and focus points to spend. The downside is making an older character means we have less time to use this character, as Father Time will eventually catch up and will die of old age. There is one way around this, and one of my favorite ways to play. We can disable birth and death, take advantage of all the extra points, and not have to worry about dying from old age. We also get to spawn in the culture we pick, so Botanians spawn here, Khazaits spawn here, and so on. If you have no clue how to build a character, campaign mode is probably best. If you want less restrictions and a really strong main character, try Sandbox mode with death disabled and 50 years old. You'll be like Thanos. Next on the list, picking a culture. There are 6 options to pick from, and it can be difficult to know what's important unless you've played several campaigns already. I've narrowed the list down to 3 that are great for beginners and experienced alike, starting with Aserai. If you plan on doing a trade-focused campaign, the Aserai can give some amazing bonuses. 30% reduced price on caravans led by companions is huge. They typically cost 15,000 dinars each, but for the Aserai that cost is reduced to 10,500. This is important for 2 reasons. You can start running caravans sooner because of the discount, and more importantly, it reduces your risk exposure. If a caravan gets captured by bandits, your investment is lost. Typically, they will survive for a few years at least, but on the off chance they get captured sooner, you're not out the whole 15,000. Aserai also pay less trade penalty, which will add up to more profits over the long run. They also ignore the desert movement speed penalty, which is nice to have, but it's much less important than the other 2 bonuses. If you're looking for a bit more combat and adventure, Vlandia can be a great starting pick. The first bonus gives plus 5% more Renown, which may not seem like much, but can make a difference. We'll cover Renown again later, but it's very important for many aspects of Bannerlord like joining a kingdom or growing the size of our party and clan. The next bonus grants more income when you join another kingdom as a mercenary. Once we reach clan tier 1, we have the option to join another kingdom as a mercenary, and they'll have to pay us for fighting battles with them, clearing bandits, or many other things. Having an extra 15% income from that mercenary contract is huge. It's not uncommon to earn 50,000 per month or more through a mercenary contract, so this bonus would add another 7,500 on top of that. And finally, for my personal favorite and what most people consider the best culture to play as, Botania. The main bonus we're interested in is the 50% less speed penalty from moving in forests. This bonus can be as high as 0.75, which is insane. Most scouting perks give us 0.1 movement speed increase, so by picking Botania and moving through forests, we essentially gain 7 free scouting perk bonuses. And on top of that, once we start taking towns, we can get a massive +1 militia bonus per day, which will help on defense. However, the movement speed bonus alone would be well worth it if that was the only bonus we got. A final note on culture before we move on. Just because we start as a specific culture doesn't mean we have to stay there. We can hire any troop we want. There's no bonus or malus for having specific troop types in our party. We can join any kingdom we want once we get to that point. Culture makes no difference there. The only other thing besides starting bonuses that culture affects is the loyalty of fiefs that we own. It can often be a good idea to join a kingdom that borders our culture so that when fiefs are taken, we can own matching culture fiefs and avoid the massive -3 loyalty debuff from wrong culture fiefs. This next section could be a 10-hour video alone, no joke. Character builds are incredibly dense and diverse in Bannerlord, but for this guide, we'll stick to the very basics that you need to know, such that you don't paint yourself into a corner, so to speak. The first thing to keep in mind is to pick a playstyle that you would personally enjoy, even if it's not the most efficient. It's easy to go down the min-max rabbit hole. You'll have tons of time to get there soon enough, so maybe don't rush it. With that said, it's generally better to specialize in 2 attributes rather than spreading your points all over the place. The best perks are unlocked at level 275 for most skills, but without enough attribute points, it will be impossible to get there. For example, we start with 2 points into each attribute, which means if we put max focus points into any given skill, the highest perk we can attain is level 200. If we want to reach 275, we need a bare minimum of 7 attribute points, but oftentimes it's best to get 10 to max it out. The problem? Attribute points are scarce, and we must allocate them with great thought. One of my favorite attributes to focus on for all experience levels is intelligence. Steward and Medicine are 2 of the best skills in the game and are increasingly more powerful the higher skill we can go. Steward's skill will increase our party size and decrease our troop wages, meaning we can field a significantly larger army for less money. Medicine is used to keep our troops alive after battle. Each time one of our troops goes down on the battlefield, there is an RNG roll for death or injury. The higher our medicine skill, the more likely we are to have injuries instead of deaths, which will not only save us money from having to recruit replacements, but also save us time. Once we get into big wars later in the game, the worst thing we can do is stop taking more land because we've got to stop and go home to recruit more troops. We won't cover all attributes here, but one final point is to avoid putting attributes into vigor and control. Unless you're role-playing a savage combat expert, those precious points would be better spent in the other 4 areas. Combat skills are generally quite slow to level up, and you can't use more than 1 at a time, so maxing one-handed, two-handed, or polearm, or bow, crossbow, and throwing in a single campaign would be nearly impossible. On the other hand, putting points into social can help reach level 275 charm, leadership, and trade, all at the same time. I do recommend picking 1 melee skill and 1 range skill. Put 3 to 5 focus points into each, and putting the rest elsewhere. So we've got our culture and starting build sorted out, but we may still be missing a few things for a complete party. Here we can see 4 main party roles that need to be filled: Scouting, Steward, Medicine, and Engineering. If our main character build doesn't include leveling up these areas, then we can hire a companion or marry a noble to help fulfill these roles. Take the previous tip of leveling up intelligence. Our main character would handle the Steward, Surgeon, and Engineering roles, but we would lack a scout. We can travel from town to town and visiting the tavern for a suitable companion for this role. By clicking on their portrait, we can find their strengths and look to hire one that has some scouting skill. Once hired, we need to go to the clan tab and assign them as the scout. Anything we do not manually assign to others will default to our main character, so be sure to assign roles to avoid missing out on those bonuses. However, companions are much more useful than just filling party roles. We don't have time to cover all of these here, but to list a few, they can be dedicated captains that give bonuses to the troops they lead. They can lead their own clan parties to help clear bandits or add more troops to our own army. They can govern fiefs we own and grant bonuses, or even become an ambassador for our clan, raising relations with other notables and nobles in the locations we drop them off at. One final note about companions: be very careful with them in combat if death is enabled. I can't tell you how devastating it can be to lose a surgeon or steward after spending 10 or more years leveling them up. It can happen in massive army versus army battles or the simplest 400 versus 10 looter battles, so try to keep them safe and off the front lines unless their role is to lead as a captain. So we know how to build an effective party and how to fill the gaps with companions, but how do we actually find them without visiting every single town in Calradia? By pressing N. N brings up the Encyclopedia, which is a veritable treasure trove of information. Let's start on the Heroes tab. The section on the left allows us to add filters to the search and narrow down for exactly what we're looking for. Under the Occupation tab, we click on Wanderers. This is the list for all companions that spawn for this campaign. Scrolling down, we want to look for one with some scouting skill. Once we find one, we can click on their name and pull up their info and location. If we want to hire them, we need to travel to the town they're located in. By clicking on the town and enabling tracking, we'll get a pop-up on the campaign map showing us the way. While we're in the Encyclopedia, let's talk about finding a suitable spouse. Let's say we want to marry into the Empire so we can have a governor that matches the culture of the fief we're going to be taking soon. We can filter by females that are alive, unless you're into necrophilia, I guess.
Nope.
Then by Empire culture, under the Occupation tab, filter by nobles, and finally not married. Now we can find all the single ladies that fit our criteria. And if birth and death is enabled, it can help to filter by age, since younger means more chances of having more children. I have 2 databases on the Discord that could be of help here. One for all possible companions in the game, and the other cataloging all single nobles at the start of the game. For example, finding a good scout is easy if you know which names to search for, as you can see here. One thing to keep in mind, companions are generated at random at the start of campaigns, and only usually have about 34 in total, so not every type of campaign will spawn each time. And be aware that some names are used twice, but have skills that are tied to the specific culture. For example, the hills can spawn as Vlandian or Empire, but if we need a scout, the Vlandian variant would be more useful since they have higher scouting skill. One final note on using the Encyclopedia. The locations displayed on noble pages are not always updated. If we're looking for someone, but their location says last seen here many days ago, then we need to refresh the page. This can be done by simply entering any town, village, or castle and exiting. I guess they had GPS back in the day as well. This trick is extremely helpful when trying to complete the main quest, Neretzi's Folly, as the nobles move around a lot. So be sure to get updated locations all along the way so you don't waste time. Moving on to Renown. This little stat is incredibly important, but can also be very slow to grind out. On the clan tab in the upper right corner, we see our current renown and progress towards the next level. By increasing our clan's renown, we can unlock new diplomatic options like becoming a mercenary or a vassal for another kingdom, the option to start our own kingdom, increase our main party size by 25 units per level, increasing the number of companions we can hire by +1 per level, increasing the number of clan parties we can start, increasing the size of companion-led parties by 15, and finally increasing the number of workshops we can own. To show how important Renown is, we start the game at Clan Tier 0 with a party size of 20, companion limit of 3, and workshop limit of 1. If we were to instantly jump to Clan Tier 6, we would then have a party size of 170, be able to hire 9 companions total, and own 7 workshops. The difference is massive. In the early game, Renown can be earned through many ways, but only 2 of them are worth mentioning here: combat and tournaments. Tournaments are the easiest to understand. Every time we win first place in a tournament, we gain +3 renown and the tournament prize. We don't even have to wager any money to do it, so it's a free chance to win. However, it's not easy to find tournaments and travel the map looking for them. Defeating bandits and clearing bandit hideouts can be even faster, and there's never a shortage of bandits on the map. 2 things to keep in mind: the more troops we fight, the more renown we will earn, and the more balance of power is in the enemy's favor, the more renown we'll earn. So fighting tough battles can be worth it from time to time. Next, let's talk about a very confusing topic for most new players: campaign map movement speed. We start the game as a solo member party on a crappy horse. By pressing this little arrow, we can expand the info in the bottom right screen to get more info on our movement speed. Currently, we move at 7.0 with a base rate of 4.9 and +2 for cavalry. If we were to remove our mount from the inventory screen, the cavalry line would go away and we would move at 5.0. Let's remount the steed and travel through the forests. As soon as we touch the edge, we immediately get a speed debuff of 1.5, which is massive. If our main character is Battanian, we see the plus 0.75 culture bonus I spoke about before. It's really powerful. Some other terrain-based movement speed debuffs are fording, which we get for crossing bridges and rivers, and reduces movement speed by 1.5. In the southern part of the map, we see a desert debuff of 0.5, which can be negated with an Aserai culture main character. Moving through the snow also reduces speed by 0.5. As we increase our party size, our movement speed will start to dip. If we have 10 foot troops, the movement speed slows to 5.1. We can change these troops to cavalry, and it only dips down to 6.9. It's not usually a good idea to run cavalry-only parties, but we can avoid some of the movement speed penalty for foot troops by adding rideable mounts into our inventory. Going back to the previous example, 10 infantry move at 5.1, but if we were to add 10 rideable mounts, that number increases to 6.0, and we see a new line item for footmen on horses. To get the max movement speed bonus, we need to have 1 rideable mount for every 1 foot troop we have. Beware, there are 2 categories of horses, rideable and pack animals. Looking at the info card, we can see this symbol designating that they are pack animals, and this symbol designating that they are rideable. Be careful when taking animals into the party though. If we have too many, we'll get a herding penalty. For example, having 30 animals in the same party would reduce our movement speed by 1.2. To get rid of the herding penalty, we need to look at a simple equation. We're allowed to have 2 animals for every 1 human in the party. So in this case, our party of 11, 1 main character, and 11 troops can have a total of 22 animals without suffering herding penalty. There's only one more caveat here. Any cavalry unit must count their current riding mount as 1 animal. Our main character is mounted, so we reduce the number by 1, and voila, the penalty is gone. Another source of movement speed penalty comes from being overburdened. On the inventory screen at the top right, we can see our current weight and the max weight capacity. If our weight goes over the limit, we increasingly slow down with the minimum movement speed being 1. We can increase our carry capacity by increasing the troops we have in the party, or by increasing the number of pack animals in our inventory. There are certain events that cause our party to be disorganized, such as combat or leaving an army. The penalty is severe, almost 2 in this case, and lasts for 6 hours or a quarter of a day. We need to keep this in mind when engaging enemies, as being slowed down this much for that length of time will make our party incredibly vulnerable to being captured. And finally, let's cover some movement speed perks. Most of them are under the scouting skills, but here's the full list. Most skills add 0.1 each, but by taking enough of them, they really add up and make a difference. Now, we've touched briefly on party size a couple times already. We know that Renown increases party size with each clan tier, but there are several other ways to increase it further. The Steward skill grants +1 party size for every 4 levels. If we had 10 attribute points into intelligence and 5 focus points, that skill would max out at 330, which means we could add an extra 82 troops to the total through Steward. There are 10 perks and many different skills that also increase party size. For example, one-handed level 250 can increase party size by 15 flat. Level 275 leadership increases party size by +1 for every level above 250. So at 330, we could add an extra 80 troops in total. There are a few other ways to increase party size, like through kingdom policies, but that's going beyond the scope of this video. One crucial thing to keep in mind regarding perks: they will have a tag that tells us who can use the perk. For example, the one-handed perk Prestige will only be active if the party leader has the perk. If our scouting companion has it leveled, it won't change our party size because they cannot lead our main party. Only our main character can be the party leader. If our scouting companion has it leveled up, it won't change our party size because they cannot lead our main party. Only our main character can. If we were to select them to lead their own party, however, the perk would then activate and they would get +15 party size. Let's take a moment to talk about the best and most frustrating part of Bannerlord, the combat system. This section could easily be split into 6 or more 30-minute standalone guides, so we're only covering the absolute basics here, starting with melee combat on foot. Between one-handed, two-handed, and polearm, one-handed is by far the safest and easiest to use. While attack damage is nice to have, swing speed is arguably more important for 2 reasons. Attacks that land generally interrupt the enemy's swing, and faster attacks are more likely to land than slower ones. When you're in combat as a melee combatant on foot, it's very important to stay with your shield wall and don't get tunnel vision. The best opportunity for getting kills happens on the flanks. As the enemy engages in combat, break off to get a better angle, throw a few attacks, and then retreat back to the line when the enemy starts to respond to you. If you prefer to fight mounted, I recommend a thrusting polearm and a shield. Mounted melee combat is much easier to survive, provided we keep moving. Try to avoid direct contact with enemies and look for easy targets that aren't looking our direction. I like to wait until both infantry lines have engaged each other and all hell breaks loose, and then roam the enemy's back lines or running down their fleeing troops. If we have a target picked out, but the enemy turns toward us as we approach, we shouldn't hesitate to abort the attack. There will be dozens of targets each battle, so don't rush it. If ranged combat on foot is more your style, I recommend starting with bow and arrow or crossbow. Throwing is much harder to hit due to the projectile arc and limited ammunition. Early game ranged combat can be challenging because of the low skill and gear. It's difficult to aim. This forces us to take shots from a closer distance, so positioning is important. Always stay near the shield wall for protection and aim for headshots when practical. Prioritize easier shots over hitting important targets. Getting hits is key to increasing skill level, which will make aiming easier. It's a positive feedback loop. Avoid shooting at shield troops from the front since their shields extend further than the visual representation. Think sci-fi force fields. Finally, let's talk about mounted archery. Hitting a target while at a full gallop in the early game is quite difficult, but it's still possible. However, I do recommend treating horse archers as a mobile platform that shoots while stationary. The XP earned is the same, and it's significantly easier to hit anything this way. So try to level up riding and bow skill before invoking your inner Mongolian warrior. I saved the best for last: how to grow our bank account. This topic is probably the hardest part to manage in the early game for beginners. I oftentimes see people upgrading their troops to the highest tier possible without having a reliable way to pay for them and end up going bankrupt. The advice I can give is to always save a certain amount of days worth of wages. I generally like to save about 20 days or close to a month, which will give me plenty of time to recover from a bad streak where money is hard to come by. If our party's daily wages cost 200 dinars per day, then we need to maintain a dinar balance of 4,000. Let's go over the 7 different ways we can earn money in the early game, starting with competing in tournaments. This is a tricky one for beginners that haven't quite gotten the hang of the combat system, but the best part is we can compete without any risk. There's an option to wager cash each round, and if we win, we get to keep all the earnings. But we don't have to wager anything, so there's no risk. We don't even take damage when we get downed. If we win the tournament, the prize can oftentimes be sold for 1 to 10,000 dinars, or even more in some cases. Next, I recommend completing any quest that requires combat. I find these quests to give the best rewards for the amount of time spent working on them. Escort merchant caravan, need help with brigands, caravan ambush, train the troops, poachers, and extortion by deserters are all great quests to do. Train the troops, for example, pays 2,400 dinars plus whatever money we make from killing the bandits to train them. Which brings us to the next method, combat. Each bandit party we clear out will have both loot and prisoners that we can sell, and it all adds up. If we can take a quest that pays us to do this, it's like double dipping, and I highly recommend it. The real money starts to roll in once we fight other noble parties, easily netting tens of thousands of dinars for even small battles. This segues nicely into the next method, becoming a mercenary. At Clan Tier 1, we're eligible to join a kingdom as a mercenary, which can be done by approaching any noble for that specific kingdom. Be sure to check the Encyclopedia first before you waste your time traveling to them. A kingdom must be at war with another kingdom to accept a mercenary contract from the player. Be careful though, minor clans do not count as being at war. Since we're already completing combat quests and fighting bandits, becoming a mercenary is just icing on the cake for stuff we're already doing. It's not uncommon to have a contract worth 150 to 200 dinars per influence, and even small bandit parties will give up to 5 influence, or an extra 750 to 1,000 dinars. If you're looking for a more relaxed way to grow wealth, then trade might be a better fit. Before we start trading, we need to have some money saved up, a few troops, and some pack animals. I recommend having at least 5,000 dinars and 20 tier 2 or tier 3 troops. Don't bother upgrading them beyond that, as they are strictly to ward off bandits, and we don't want high troop wages eating into our profits. We travel to the nearest town to begin our trade run. Click on the filter to the far right for trade goods and look for items for sale with a green number. Hovering the mouse over this good will show its price relative to the average global price. I typically try to buy anything valued at 50% or below the average global market price. Next, we travel to another town and check the selling price. We want to sell anything that isn't green, with red being the higher profit margin since red indicates pricing above the average global price. However, it's better to move more volume than it is to hold on to trade goods and waiting for that killer trade. So selling at yellow is totally acceptable. Remember, we bought these goods at 50% below the average, so selling them at yellow, which is the average price, will still net a healthy margin. With a little trade skill, we can reach trade perk 25 to help us determine good buying prices, and trade level 50 to help us determine good selling prices. The next logical step for any aspiring trader is to expand into companion-led caravans. Not only is this a solid financial decision, but it's also a great way to level up companions. There isn't much to it. We hire a companion from the tavern and speak to any notable in that town, ask to start a trade caravan, and select our companion. If we can find a companion with specific skills like trade or scouting, even better. There is an option to pay for more expensive troops, but in my experience, it's generally not worth the extra expense. So stick with the basic option. And if you're starting to stack up tons of cash and not sure what to do with it, you can start buying workshops. Once again, workshops are a difficult topic that fall outside the scope of this guide, but I can recommend Flasson 19's channel for more info on that. Link is in the description. However, the best next step you can take as a beginner is becoming competent at melee combat. So click this video right here for my complete melee combat guide. Thanks as always to the many channel members and Patreon supporters who support this channel financially and make guides like this possible. The average market value or more.